I see lots of people taking photographs of our illustrious panel, and I'd just like to let you know I'm also available for photographs. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Orbinski, and I'm the principal here at Massey College. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to just begin by acknowledging that we're on the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and we're also on the traditional territory of many First Nation peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And this territory is also home to many other Indigenous people, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, from across what Indigenous peoples refer to as Turtle Island, or many others refer to as Canada. And we're grateful to our Indigenous brothers and sisters for the opportunity to work on this land, and I very fulsomely acknowledge that we have a duty to share and care for this land. Now, it's very much my pleasure to welcome you all to Massey College, and most especially for this panel on AI, artificial intelligence in the Canadian context. It's part of Massey's ongoing commitment to learning, to leadership, to civil discourse for the public good on issues of contemporary concern. And there are few issues that are more concerning and more engrossing than our topic for today, what the future looks like in an age of artificial intelligence. Before introducing our panelists, I want to also extend my fullest gratitude to the AI and Human Society's Junior Fellows group for conceiving and for organizing this afternoon's event. Massey College Junior Fellows are graduate students here at the University of Toronto, and they're not only scholars, they are conveners, builders of community, and leaders in shaping conversations that matter for the public good. And this group, Patrick Lee, where are you? Just, yeah, put up your hand. Patrick Lee, Arena Moon, where are you? There you are, Arena. Rowan Munson. I always think of Rowan Atkinson when I think of Rowan, but anyway. Jessica Bowe. She's in Pearson. Oh, okay, sorry, okay. Jessica, Reneé Sirbu. Okay, thank you, Reneé. Oh, okay. And of course, Del Coburn. There you are, Del. My vision is not as good as it once was. So, this group has brought together perspectives from computer science, philosophy, governance, culture, and everyday life. And their work embodies what Massey College strives for, interdisciplinary inquiry guided by curiosity, collaboration, and a primary commitment to the public good. Now, today's conversation will be moderated by Junior Fellow Reneé Sirbu, who is already on the panel, as I've been just told. Reneé is a doctoral student at the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology. Renée's work on digital ethics, healthcare technologies, and the future of human-machine interaction reminds us that technological questions are always human questions as well. And now to our panelists. We're very much honored to welcome Geoffrey Hinton, Nobel laureate in physics, and widely known around the world as the godfather of modern artificial intelligence. And the godfather not in the sense of the mob, but the godfather in the sense of intellectually speaking. Professor Hinton's groundbreaking work on neural networks literally transformed the field, the emerging field of artificial intelligence. And his recent reflections on the risks and the responsibilities of artificial intelligence challenge us to think deeply about where this technology is taking us or where we may take it. Joining him is Karina Vold. and Karina is professor at the University of Toronto's Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology. Professor Vold's research explores the philosophical and ethical implications of artificial intelligence, and particularly how these systems shape human cognition, autonomy, and social life. And we're also delighted to welcome Nick Frosst. Nick is co-founder of Cohere and one of Canada's leading voices in enterprise artificial intelligence. Nick's work bridges cutting-edge research and real-world application, helping organizations deploy artificial intelligence responsibly while navigating questions of data security, scalability, and innovation. Now, together our panelists bring perspectives from foundational research, philosophy, and industry practice, and they'll help us grapple with questions central to Canada's future and our human future in relation to artificial intelligence. What does AI mean in practice? Why has Canada excelled in discovery but struggled to scale? And what should Canada optimize for in a rapidly evolving technological landscape? And as well, there are myriad ethical issues and questions that I'm sure will emerge in the discussion. At Massey, we convene conversations that help our society understand itself and hopefully make good choices in an ever-changing world. We bring together scholars, practitioners, and students to ask difficult questions with clarity and to ask those questions with purpose. And this event is part of that work. So please join me, everyone, in thanking our junior fellows first for their leadership and in welcoming our panelists to Massey College.
Great, thank you, James. I want to pick up first on something implicit that's just been said, which is that the story of AI in Canada in many ways is a story that started right here in Toronto and began in large part with ideas that most people thought were wrong. So what I find most interesting about the three people on this stage is that they don't entirely agree with each other either. And I think that's why this conversation is especially worth having. So my job this afternoon is mostly to get out of the way. So let's begin. Before we can talk about what AI is doing or where it's going, I think we need to either agree or disagree on what we're actually talking about when we throw around the term intelligence. Professor Hinton, you've said that AI systems may not just one day be conscious, but may indeed already possess some form of what you refer to as subjective experience. Nick, you've compared AI to artificial flight, useful, transformative, but fundamentally different from the real thing. Professor Vold, your work suggests that the distinction between man and machine is already blurring in ways that we haven't fully digested. So I'd like to ask each of you in turn, what is your working definition of intelligence? What does it mean for something, human, machine, or otherwise, to be intelligent? And does your answer change when the thing doing the thinking isn't biological?
Okay, I'd like to start my answer by acknowledging that we're on land stolen from Indigenous people. And if you actually want to share in care, you could give some money to Water First, which is a Canadian charity that trains people in Indigenous communities to produce safe drinking water. At present, 20% of Indigenous communities in Ontario don't have safe drinking water. Okay, done with that, sorry. The lawyers wouldn't like me saying we stole it.
I like what you said.
So, yeah, what do we mean by intelligence? I think it's just obvious these chatbots are intelligent. A long time ago, a guy called Turing said, you know, if it can answer questions and you can't tell whether it's a person or whether it's a machine answering the questions, this is roughly what he said, then we'll call it intelligent, because he got fed up with people saying machines couldn't be intelligent. They've passed the Turing test. To all intents and purposes, they passed the Turing test. There's a very nice recent paper in Nature. Eddie Chen, who's the first author, is here, saying they passed the the Turing test. So they're intelligent. That's what I mean.
Should we go down the line here?
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, I think I'd love a definition of intelligence that doesn't rely on a particular kind of substrate. So I think ideally we don't want a definition that sort of excludes a priori anything non-biological. And yeah, I think most operative definitions today probably include something like, problem solving, being able to pursue goals, being able to learn. And I'm happy, definitely agreeing that we have different examples of like artificial systems that are intelligent. So I think there's like different things that make human intelligence unique and special, or at least there's things that we're particularly good at, let's say. And one thing that my research touches on, which Reneé mentioned, is the fact that we're seem to be particularly good at making use of our environment and the tools that we sort of build to help complete some of the tasks that we want to have done. So to help us with our problem solving, to kind of offload and to have our tools match the things that our biological intelligence is good at, but also by making use of like the environment and space around us. So I don't think we're the only creatures that do that, but I do think that's something kind of special that we seem to be particularly good at.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning that I've compared artificial intelligence to artificial flight. It was Feynman, I think, who first came up with that analogy. That analogy is to say that we have systems, biological and artificial, that have the property of flight, but they do it in very different ways. And so they're very good at different things. Like a sparrow is much more dynamic than a jet engine, but a jet engine flight can fly for significantly longer than an albatross can or something. I think we have a very similar thing going on with artificial intelligence. We have things that are intelligent, definitely, but they're intelligent in a very different way than we are. And so they're much better than us at a bunch of things, which I'm sure you in your life at this point have experienced, and much worse than us at a bunch of other things that we are still very good at, which I think you probably also will have experienced in using an LLM for any everyday purpose. So that isn't really a definition of intelligence. I don't really think any of us gave definitions of intelligence, but it is rather notoriously difficult to define. I also, when thinking about artificial intelligence, the question that comes up is like, what is artificial general intelligence? And for me, we will have artificial general intelligence when we treat computers as people, when we expect them to behave like people and subsequently treat them like that. So while I say we definitely have artificial intelligence, there are things that are intelligent. Computers do not operate in the same way that people do. They do not serve the same function that they do in society, and so I don't think we have an artificial general intelligence, nor do I think we're close to getting there.
Great, thank you all for not providing exact definitions, but working definitions nonetheless. I think we can press on that gap a little bit, and so I'd like to start first, Professor Vold, with your work, which suggests that when we use AI as a cognitive tool, either to remember or to reason or to decide, what we're doing is not exactly what we do when we use a common calculator, for example. So the extended mind thesis claims that cognitive processes are not restricted to the brain or the body, but actually extend into our physical environments, and thus the tools that we interact with, as well as the people and the spaces that we take up. So under this thesis, using these tools is arguably becoming indistinguishable in many ways from thinking. So does this change maybe how we should assess the gap between human and machine intelligence, a gap we've just kind of discussed a little bit already?
Yeah, great. So yeah, I think it changes it maybe a little bit. So I think questions about what AI systems can do on their own are rich and interesting, and then I think we should also be interested in questions about what these systems are doing to our intelligence. And so drawing on Feynman, another Nobel laureate in physics, he famously said to his biographer, who was asking, can you walk me through your thinking process? And he said, you've got all the notes. That's my thinking. Those aren't records of my thoughts. Those are the thoughts. So the idea there was that he wasn't like thinking stuff and then recording his thoughts, but he was working through the actual problem solving on the paper in this sort of like back and forth action and perception loop. And we do this all the time, right? So if you think about, if you've ever played Scrabble, instead of trying to rearrange the tiles in your head, you just kind of move them around on their little stand, right? And that's a way of problem solving that like simplifies the task into just like small action and perception tasks to put like vowels and consonants together, for example. So we do this in like really simple ways all the time. But I think with AI, we're potentially doing this in like much more sophisticated ways, right? So like part of what's exciting is that, as Nick said, AI can do so many things better than us. And so it's interesting to see like how we're interacting with this technology, what sort of cognitive capacities we're improving by relying on those tools. So it's improving like how we search for information. It's improving like maybe even what sort of questions we ask, where we find information. But that's also having effects on how we think. So questions about like, you know, what types of things do we need to learn now? What type of skills do we need to have? How do we want to sort of protect the kind of like critical cognitive skills that we need to develop and sort of maintain internally before we start offloading, for example? So it's kind of raising new, rich, interesting questions, I think.
Great. If no one has anything else to add, maybe?
I agree that people working with AI as tools are a cognitive system. I kind of like this idea that cognition isn't just in the head, it's a whole system working together. But I think it's separable from the idea of whether these AIs are beings. So we can have AIs that we use as tools. We can have people that we use as tools.
Absolutely.
That's just separate from the question whether AIs themselves are beings.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're two separate questions, but I think on the first question, it's very interesting to think about how using an AI changes cognition. But as you gestured to earlier, like that's a question that we have been asking since writing, at least, since maybe little cuneiform counting clay pieces. Like I think that question of where does our intelligence stop and end seems to be something that we've been thinking about for as long as human history has been around. Well, before history. I don't know if that question is different, is like meaningfully different when using an LLM, or if that's just a continuation of the same question. I guess maybe you're saying it is meaningfully different now.
Yeah, great. So I think there's definitely two different questions we can ask. Like, what are the cognitive capacities of these AI systems in themselves, right? Are they capable of curiosity, of creativity, of consciousness? And then we can think about what are these systems doing for us? What impact or effects are they having on our cognition? And so I guess Nick's question is like, well, how is that different than like pens and papers? Well, these technologies are
way before pens and papers. How's that different than like little acorns counting in a hole?
Yeah, okay, great, yeah. So I think we've been extending our minds for a really long time, and I think that's part of what we're really good at as humans. So in a sense, like it's not new. Like it's not like new that we're extending our cognition. But I think what's new is that this technology is just so powerful in what it can do. And it's, you know, there's a few things that kind of make it distinct, plausibly. So, like, as you pointed to, it seems to be capable of doing certain things way better than even we can. And that's a little bit different than, like, a pencil, which we're really just kind of using more passively. It's not adding to or complementing us in the same way. But to follow up on Jeff's point as well, in some ways, like these new artificial intelligence systems are like the way we rely on other people, right? So it's sort of like interdependent couples who use each other as like cognitive resources, where my husband, who's back there, he'll remember all the names of people and I'll remember the places, and we'll kind of trade off, right? So now that we have systems, we have tools that can do that with us, but plausibly even without some of the trade-offs that come with couplehood, of course. I appreciate the trade-offs. But so yeah, so they raise new opportunities, right, and new benefits, but potentially new risks too, right? Because you're not alone with your AI tool. They're also created by companies, and your data is being sort of like used and accessed by those companies. So I think there's a range of sort of different questions that this particular technology comes with. Yeah, and I don't know if they're different in kind or just sort of different in like degree. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think, at least in part, when I think of this difference, I think of the fact that, for example, Nick, acorns, I don't know if anyone's arguing that an acorn can do math better than we can or is smarter than we can, I guess.
No, and a group of acorns can definitely do better math. And like if you have a set of acorns in front of you,
right,
and you have little holes to put them in so you can count, as seems to be the origin of writing, definitely you're better at math, collectively.
With using the acorns.
Yeah, with
yes,
that
yeah,
thing.
Yeah.
I would argue that an LLM, similarly to a person, right now is not intrinsically goal-directed. And so if you want an LLM, which they're definitely better at math in many situations than people are, but you still have to kick it off yourself. You still have to start the process yourself. Is that a difference in degree or a difference in kind than acorns in a hole in, you know, cradle of civilization. It's a difference in kind.
No, but I don't
The
think
mic.
whoops. I don't think anybody would argue that the acorns can do math. Lots of people would argue that the LLM can do math.
Well, yeah, but that's where they might be wrong. Like that is exactly the debate, right? Like is
And you're wrong.
Science.
I think what's definitionally challenging.
I should say Nick and I are friends.
Yeah. And I keep getting put on stages where I have to disagree with a guy with a Nobel Prize, and it's really challenging.
That was actually part of the invitation. Yeah. You have to disagree. Please fight. Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge, right? The definition, understanding, or the layperson's understanding of what it is an LLM is and what it is an LLM can do, rather than what we can do with an LLM, which I think that people certainly on this stage understand, and I'm sure everyone in this room does understand, but I am also thinking about the greater population and their understanding of, access to these services and how that changes their cognition in the ways that perhaps acorns might not have. But yeah, it's just, I think we relate this back to the difficulty of providing a definition in the first place, or understanding what it means for this being to have intelligence. So to turn the page a little bit, just being mindful of time and knowing that the audience is likely eager to ask our esteemed panelists some questions, I'd like to think a little bit more about the Canadian context, and understanding that, Professor Hinton, when you arrived at the University of Toronto in 1987, neural nets were, in your words, a silly romantic fantasy. So I think it's safe to say that at this point your work has served as the foundation for artificial intelligence as we know it today, more broadly, of course, but also in Canada specifically. So now Vector Institute, Schwartz-Reisman Institute, and companies like Cohere are increasingly positioning Toronto as one of the most significant AI cities in the world. So Nick, you've explicitly mentioned that you want to build something distinctly Canadian and less Silicon Valley centric. Can you talk us through what that actually means in practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think for many years now, for, 2 decades or more, our experience of technology has been largely defined by a relatively small group of people in Silicon Valley. I think that's when people's understanding of the computer, their experience of the internet, their experience of tech in general is mostly governed by a bunch of companies in a pretty small area. And I think I'm not alone in feeling pretty let down by that. Like when I was here as an undergrad, I was very much a techno-optimist. I very much felt like, what was going to happen with the proliferation of technology was more democracy and more information and more education and more creativity. And I am hard pressed to find people who think that anymore. Right? Like we all mostly feel burdened by technology. We all hate our phones. We all, anytime a new piece of technology comes out, I ask myself, is it gonna make me use my phone more or less? And if it's gonna make me use my phone more, I probably don't want it. And that seems to be a common experience. Probably even among, maybe we can just, I should check with you guys if this seems, but I think mostly, this is a common experience. And I think the reason for that is the culture of Silicon Valley and what it has become, and the ways it interplays with the political system, with the capitalist system, with a whole bunch of complicated things. But the end result is something that I don't think is very good and don't want any more of. So I'm very interested in building a company that, instead of holding people down, empowers people. Cohere is a sovereign AI company. And when I say sovereign AI company, I mean we provide sovereignty of the technology at many spatial scales. When we deploy into a company, the employees of that company can use our technology to be more sovereign themselves, to spend less time on doing boring work, spend more time on doing the things that they're good at and that they enjoy doing. A company gets the technology that is tailored specifically to them, and subsequently the company can operate more freely, independent of market trends. When we give it into a country, the country has the technology that they now control, that speaks their language, that is not beholden to a tech elite that could shut it off at a moment's notice. And I think that's a mission that many people in Canada resonate with. Like, we are a country that tries to build up others and build up ourselves. And I think that's the vision that technology needs to adopt. in order to be something that people are still excited about. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Professor Hinton, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially because you've been, I think, very direct about your opinions on the up-and-coming techno-oligarchy that we're seeing in the US. So I personally, I came back to Canada from the US in part because of, I share this sentiment. So I'd like to know if you think Canadian AI is culturally meaningful as a category, or is the underlying technology kind of just the same everywhere and the difference is just where the profits land?
I don't really have much interest to say about this. I think Canadian AI is probably going to be a bit better because people like Nick are involved in it. I hate YouTube Shorts. That's the main thing I have to say.
No opinions on Instagram Reels, maybe. On that note, Professor Vold, I want to bring in a concept you've written about and one that we're actually currently working on a bit together on value alignment. We often talk about aligning AI with human values, but whose values are we actually talking about? The history of technology suggests that the values embedded in a tool tend to reflect the values of whoever built it. And Professor Hinton, you've also been very vocal about the difficulty of value embedding and the gap between what developers intend and what systems. Like you seemed like you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a wide range of values in our human societies. Some people think that dropping 2,000-pound bombs on schools to kill a terrorist is a good idea. Actually, I think it would be good. If you got Hitler and you knew the only way to get him was by dropping a 2,000-pound bomb on a school, I would do it. But it'd have to be Hitler. So that's an example of there's a wide diversity of opinions on that issue. And how are you going to get AI to align with all of them?
Let me jump in?
Sure, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this is absolutely a really important problem and one that the AI safety community has been working on for a long time. Clearly, humans disagree with one another. Groups of humans disagree with one another on what the right things to do are. I think humans just individually, sometimes we're confused and conflicted about what to do, right? We don't always even know within ourselves what to do. And furthermore, that's true even across like different time scales, right? So sometimes you feel like there's things you want to do in the moment. There's things that like are gratifying or satisfying on the short term. But those things can conflict with your longer term goals, right? Wanting to become a better person, wanting to pursue generosity or patience or what have you. So there's even sort of like conflicts within different temporalities. So this question of like whose values to align with, we can ask about like, should it be that a technology should be aligned with a particular user's values, with particular groups of users? How big should those groups be? Are we talking about different nations, different linguistic groups? Are we talking about just humans? We'll often hear value alignment posed as how do we align AI systems to human values? Well, there's our current generation, but we don't have to look very far into human history to see how poorly we treat each other, right? So what we wouldn't want is to have an AI system that encodes and reifies our current value system in a way that prevents moral progress, because we know that we've enjoyed moral progress and that's benefited many people. So then there's the question of like current generations or future generations. Is it just humans or do we want to include the environment and animals and other species? So there's a whole bunch of different questions here, like a wide range of things that have to be worked out. And I think not just by technologists. Like I think these are questions that really deeply need to include humanities scholars and scholars that engage with sort of non-technical solutions often, because these are sort of broader social problems. Yeah, I could go on, but so big problem, really important.
And so on that kind of understanding that there are several values and that perhaps we need to be in collaboration with not just one another, but with our environments and with, disparate kind of communities, this concept of value pluralism, is this something that is even compatible in the first place with building a coherent or interoperable AI system? Is that something that we want?
happy to jump in. So just for those who don't know, value pluralism can be contrasted with value monism. So value monism says there's just one value. Everything we value instrumentally until it leads us back to the one thing we actually really value intrinsically. So Aristotle, for example, was a value monist. He said the one thing we value is eudaimonia, the Greek word, so flourishing or happiness. So everything you think you value is really something that you value sort of in pursuit of that one thing. So a good example of something that's like seems pretty obviously not intrinsically valuable, but extrinsically valuable or instrumentally valuable is money, right? So you want money because it can get you other things. So on a value monist view, everything is in pursuit of something else, and then they reduce everything we value to one thing. And of course, they have to tell a story about how that kind of reduction happens. But for the value pluralist, they're going to say, look, there's a bunch of things we value, and we can't reduce one to another. So maybe we value integrity, we value our privacy, we value our security, we value having an explanation for why AI systems do the things they do. And so if you're a value pluralist, then you're going to think that, okay, the way we have to embed values into a machine is that we have to identify all the values, and then we have to find a way to kind of like embed it into the machine. And then we have to figure out how this machine is going to prioritize the values that matter most in different contexts, right? Because clearly in some contexts, we value certain things over others, right? So you might care more about privacy with your medical data, privacy with your like intimate chats, then you care about privacy about like what groceries you bought at the grocery store, right? So there's some things that we can trade them off, but they trade off differently in different contexts. So yeah, very hard. We want to make sure that we don't leave anything out, right? This is a big part of the alignment problem, is that when we articulate our values, we want to make sure that we articulate them both completely and correctly, so that we don't end up with these kind of King Midas situations. So for the audience, of course our panelists probably know, but for the audience, the King Midas problem is based on this folklore of like King Midas who had one wish and decided to wish that he wanted everything he touched to turn to gold.
Is anybody like that now?
No, that's long over.
Well, I would hope people know not to do that. But of course, it had terrible consequences. So what we want to make sure with AI systems is that we are careful not to misstate our objectives.
Just to stir up a little controversy, maybe. Yeah, okay. Good. So I think that thinking about, this is a very interesting conversation and very much worth having. I think it's, when thinking about the values embedded in a technology, you can talk about that in the lens of LLMs, thinking about, if I write a sentence, how's it going to end that sentence? Is it going to end it in a way that is valuable to me or value aligned with me? If I give it a bunch of tools, is it going to use those tools in a way that's value aligned? But you can also have conversations like this with any technology, right? With any sufficiently complicated systems, the values are emergent in the way that system operates. I think we have a tendency when talking in the world over the past few years, especially last year and 2 years ago, when thinking about LLMs, was really talking about the value alignment problem as though what they were creating was a small person or a small god. And so the discussions was like, well, what values does it have? But these technologies, by the nature of how they work, predicting the next word in a sequence of words, can be given whatever values you want through whatever prompting mechanism you want. And the values that are important are the values that the person getting the technology to do something, like building a more complicated system with an LLM or prompting an LLM, are the values that they are giving to the system by nature of how they're using it. So I think there's a lot of conversations about alignment and I want to make sure that if I ask the model a moral question, it will respond in a way that that aligns with me, right? But that misses the way most of these technologies are being used. People are not going to the LLMs very often for moral questions. They're not saying, hey, I don't know how I stand on this moral decision. I'm going to use an LLM to figure that out. Rather, they're using LLMs for augmenting processes within their work life and their personal life. We're using LLMs for handling tons of data and doing all kinds of, some of it very mundane, routine processing, some of it very complicated and agentic work. But mostly, it's down to how the builder has prompted, started this, kicked off this Rube Goldberg machine of LLMs calling each other and calling other tools, rather than just getting it to answer some question. And I find a lot of the alignment work has been focusing on the question thing as though that will have predictive consequences for how the systems are used in practice. Yeah.
I agree. You can make LLMs kind of espouse different values depending on how you prompt them. Yeah. But still, when you first train them, the data you train them on is going to have a big influence on the values that it's easy to get them to exhibit.
Absolutely.
And the people doing the training are curating the data. And I think that's a very important aspect, that we should insist people curate the data so as to give them values that we think are good. Now, the problem is we don't agree on that, but we agree on quite a few things.
There's a lot we agree on, and even amongst the various people building models, I think there's a lot of things that we all are pretty much on the same page about how these, like what data should go into trying to train these models to align them at least a bit.
So
There's also a lot of disagreement. I mean,
Absolutely.
when you're training one of these big systems, I bet you a lot of the people training them think taxes shouldn't be very, very high on rich people.
So I just want to pick up on something Nick said. So it's definitely worth noting.
You want to talk about taxes? We can okay, sorry.
It is tax season coming up, so popular conversation in my household. Most technology, or I would say plausibly all technologies embed some values, right? So if you're surprised by that, right, think about like if there's any left-handed people in the room, right? We tend to sort of value the convenience of right-handers over left-handers in everyday life. I'm right-handed. It works out for me. But there's lots of other like mundane examples that STS scholars will point to, but also kind of more like problematic ones. So for example, one STS scholar has this famous article about how artifacts have politics, and it's Langdon Winner, I believe is the name. And it's about these like low-hanging bridges that were built across New York City, which separated more affluent, typically white neighborhoods from poorer, lower socioeconomically, and more sort of diverse and black neighborhoods in New York City. And so what happened is that when there was a need to drive buses from one area to the other, when buses sort of became more available, it was impossible to do that because the buses were too high and the bridge was too low. And so that because of this like entrenching of like certain decisions, even though it wasn't intentional, right? It wasn't like people built the bridge to do this, to promote segregation or something. It just made it really hard to change because it's really expensive to tear down a bridge and build a new one. And so it was really hard to connect those neighborhoods. Now, in the case of LLM systems, like this was like a really local problem to two neighborhoods in New York City. But what we have here is like a few companies building this technology that has like a wide range of purposes, a wide range of uses, and is being used across the world. Right? So the values that it embeds is impacting everybody. It has way more impact than just these kind of like local design choices. So it's not just like the widespread use of the technologies that I think is different than the problem that we've seen for a long time. But it's also kind of like how powerful they are and like, yeah, how predominant they are. So there's like a few, I think, differences in like this kind of like standard question.
I think not to be the token philosopher obsessed with definitions here as well, but I think, at least in part, there's also the consideration of which, sub-understandings of which values mean what. So, for example, I think the popular example for us is always justice. So you want to program an LLM in a justice-driven way. Well, the definition of justice, especially from the medical ethics tradition, is disparate. So one definition of justice might encourage you to kind of raise the baseline to a standard level, and one definition might encourage you to kind of increase everyone to one ideal form of kind of living, of just living. So even within a value in and of itself, let's say we agree that we need justice-driven LLMs, agreeing on what that looks like is also challenging, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I hear a proposal for a justice-driven LLM, like I think, of course, it's certainly something we should aspire to, but another solution to that is just not use an LLM in situations when justice is the question, right? Like I don't think LLMs should be used in sentencing decisions. I think they should have very limited use in anything where justice is involved. And there's a handful of human endeavors that I don't think an LLM is particularly useful for. And that's not because they can't be helpful in the extremities around that and like data processing around that or something, but because that thing that you're doing is explicitly difficult kind of on purpose. Like it is supposed to be a challenging thing for a judge to go through to decide what sentence should be handed out. And there are situations where I think even if we're able to value a line in LLM so that it's useful, like that's kind of missing the point. Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I'm just wondering if we could put the rabbit kind of back in that hat at this point, or what ways can we use to ensure that people don't use an LLM in these kinds of circumstances?
Yeah.
I don't agree. I mean, suppose we had an AI system that was much smarter than people. You would still not want it to be involved in making the kinds of decisions judges make. Is that right? Even though a lot of judges are quite weird.
There's a lot of, be involved is a good
Eileen
question.
Cannon. Let's take Eileen Cannon.
Yeah.
I'd rather have an AI system.
Well, and I know there's that great study that showed people are more likely to sentence longer, like before lunch, and something like when they're hungry, like people are fallible, and there's all kinds of issues and biases that people bring in, and LLM maybe could be useful as an augmentative tool in that situation, but ultimately, like I think as a society we've agreed that we want people to be involved in that. And I think sometimes when people are looking at the history of technology, they have the perception that one technology is just like a wheel that is spinning and it cannot be stopped going downhill. And I don't think history bears out that way. I think there are examples of when technology was adopted and then rejected because it didn't fit with the cultural norms. And it's a strange situation we've ended up in where even a proposal like that, I think a lot of people think is, dreaming, is like fantasy. But I think as this technology develops, we are seeing ways in which people are incorporating this or not incorporating it based on values and an understanding of how society works, not just on what is the easiest thing to do, what's the fastest thing to do. Right? So yeah, I think we kind of can put that cat back in the bag. And I think we as humanity have done that successfully a few times with different technologies.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, there's some weird ones. I mean, like farming is a good example of there's a common understanding that like when farming happened, suddenly everybody adopted it. But that's not the case. There were cultures that adopted farming and then later rejected it because it didn't fit into their culture. Maybe for better or for worse, I don't know. We all adopted farming now, for the most part. But I think I can't think of a more fundamental technology that was adopted and then rejected afterwards because it didn't fit with the cultural understanding at the time.
So I don't think we just want smart judges. I think we also want like moral judges, right? And they're I'm not sure how I fall in this still, but I think I'm sympathetic to what's called the orthogonality thesis, which I'm sure Jeff knows about. The idea is that, you can increase intelligence, let's say we just go max on intelligence. It doesn't fall from that we're going to have a super moral AI system, right? So super intelligence doesn't imply super moral. In other words, you can have, it's like the is-ought fallacy from Hume. So you can have all the descriptive facts, but it doesn't mean that just by knowing all the descriptive facts about the world, you're going to know what the right thing to do is. Normativity doesn't come out of descriptive facts. So some people will say, like, this is a kind of like, the best way to make something really, really safe is just to give it as much intelligence as possible. But it's not obvious that that's going to solve the problem of value alignment.
Yeah, I agree. But some judges are stupid.
I agree.
Some judges
that
are
I
stupid,
agree.
yeah.
So maybe thinking a little bit about if it were a perfect universe and if we do agree that in some ways we can kind of bake in ideal values into these systems, whether they're super intelligent or not, how can we make them perhaps more moral in that way? I'd like to ask each of you in turn maybe to kind of speculate creative value that might ideally be baked into our models in the future.
I mean, I think the main hope for humanity is to somehow be able to make AI beings care more about us than they do about themselves. And we don't know how to do that. If we can do that, we might be happy to coexist with them because they really do care about people. Yeah, that's what I'd like to be able to do, but I don't know how to do it.
Guess I'm next in line.
And I need more time.
Okay. Sure, I think that sort of care for others would be a wonderful value. Yeah, I'm not sure. This is a good question. It's a hard question. I think there's just I guess maybe because I'm sympathetic to value pluralism, I don't think there's just one value that I can trump over others.
Yeah, I guess I want to push back on the premise of the question a little bit, just to reiterate. Like, I think these technologies, they should do what they're told. That we're making a model. It is a tool for a person. It should do what the person tells them to. It should not have it having its own values. It is not the mental model I have for understanding how these technologies work, nor does that match with my experience of using or building the technology.
So you don't want it ever to say that's just wrong?
Well, you can say it. I'll give that one to you. Yeah, but no, I mean, I think these technologies, yeah, for instance, so at Cohere, like the name of the company is Cohere because we have an understanding that you can train a model to be coherent, to take in a document and write a bunch of things that are logically entailed by that document, but you can't train the model to say only things that are true, because that truth is a shared consensus metric, not something we can have an objective function for gradient descent on, and so we train these models to be coherent.
I'd like to register disagreement on that.
On this one? Okay, you can come back to this one. But when you're thinking about values you could give to a model, like the values it should have is the values that you as the user are giving it. Now we can have a discussion about what values we think we should be building our technology with as builders. And as mentioned before, there are lots of values in the technology ecosystem that I completely disagree with. And I think the vast majority of people do at this point based on our experience of technology. And so those are the things I think it's worth talking about. Like us as builders of systems and users of systems, what are the things we want technology to do? Largely, I would say we want it to empower us as opposed to tying us down. And that's the biggest value I think we need technology to do now.
Can I jump in here?
On the yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sure. So the empower point is hard. So your answer helped provoke an answer for me. So if I'm talking about like current LLM systems, I think what we want to avoid, or at least one thing we really want to avoid, is like the sycophancy that we saw with like OpenAI's GPT-4o, which they even self-published that like, okay, our model was too sycophantic. And by that, they meant that it would agree with whatever the user put in, right? So if I said, oh, I just wrote this poem, and it would, what do you think? And it would be like, oh, wow, Pulitzer, amazing. Like it would kind of just like really pump you up. And I think we don't want that, right? We want some friction in these LLMs, at least in some instances. So the way that people are often using them is like as companions or as therapists. Sometimes people do use them for moral guidance. I don't, I wouldn't recommend it. But some people from the statistics I've seen of the use cases do. And so I think, yeah, we want to try to design these systems to be able to optimize not just for short-term engagement, which is part of what's leading to the sycophancy, arguably, is like the RLHF, so the training on human feedback and sort of learning by a human saying, I prefer this response or that response. So in the short term, it feels like what we want is just a system that's going to make us feel good. But actually, in the long term, that might not be good for us, right? In the long term, what might be better for us is a system that says, like, look, Karina, I know you want to watch cat videos all Saturday, but you also want to be a generous person with your time, so it's time to leave your house and spend your day like doing something charitable for the society or something. So sometimes a little friction in certain cases, I think, is worthwhile. And so I'd like to see systems designed better that can kind of promote that longer term goals.
This is the same problem with YouTube Shorts.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd just like to go back to something Nick said,
which
is about
truth of not being an objective function.
Yes, yeah. I think this needs to be challenged.
Yep.
We could all agree that snow was black, and we would all be wrong.
So yes.
No. Yeah, sorry.
So
what's going on is the social construction of concepts. We have to agree on concepts so we can communicate. Once we've agreed on those concepts, we can then make statements using those concepts that are just wrong. And we could all agree on that, like the Earth is flat, and we'd all be wrong.
Sure, but that's a coherence thing, right? Like we have a set of assumptions and axioms, and then we're saying that this sentence is true under those conditions. And like,
once we.
All right, I know this is a huge debate in philosophy.
We're
not going to sort it out today.
Once we've agreed by what we mean by flat and what we mean by round, we could still be a bunch of people that all think the Earth is flat, and we'd all be wrong.
Can I give the example that we've hit before, and then can I pass it to you, the expert in the field? Okay. So the debate that we have had on this before is that I have said to Jeff that there's a question of like, does the Earth rotate around the sun, or does the sun rotate around the Earth?
That's the wrong contrast. Sorry, that's the wrong contrast.
Why is that the wrong?
Because the perceptual phenomena is the Earth rotates around the sun rotates around the Earth, or the Earth rotates on its axis. many people use sort of linguistic reasoning to say the contrast is between the Earth going around the sun and the sun going around the Earth.
Yeah.
No, the sun going around the Earth is about days, and the Earth going around the sun is about years.
Sure. So, but both of these are going to end up with.
I just wanted to stand up for a bit of physics.
Yeah, but both. you do have a Nobel Prize in physics. That is, important. Yeah. But both of these are going to end up with saying there's a frame of reference and then a set of equations that you can use for making predictions about the world under that frame of reference. You can make a perfectly functional system with either frame of reference. It's just that one of them is really complicated and not very useful, and the other is much simpler and much more useful, right? But those are still assumptions that we have, and then based on those use to make accurate predictions. But the universe doesn't owe us simplicity. The fact that one of them is simpler than the other, I don't think is grounds to say that one is more true than the other. It's just that one is more effective.
So
when you're trying to train a model,
I agree. If you think
we really got to throw it over to you.
May
Because
I?
please clear this up for us, because
I may be on Team Jeff here, though. But
then never mind. I'll keep.
Well, I'll just add that.
Look, if you take the debate between does the Earth go around the sun or does the sun go around the Earth, both parties in that debate would agree that if you went a long way away and looked, it would look different depending on whether the Earth went around the sun or the sun went around the Earth. It wouldn't just be, you can't look at it and say they're both equally good. One's right and the other's wrong. And if you go a long way away, you'll be able to see which one's right and which one's wrong.
So I believe in capital T truth, and that would put me on Jeff's side here as the short answer. So there's coherentism is like a view about what truth is. So philosophers, especially philosophers of language, will debate this a lot. Coherentism is subject to what's called the drunken sailor fallacy. Okay, so a bunch of sailors get off the boat, and they all say, they've all got sea legs, so they're all zigzagging, but they all agree that they're walking in a straight line, right? So that's the problem with coherentism.
They're Republicans, right?
So yeah, whereas the kind of Tarskian notion of truth is snow is white if and only if snow is white, right? So if it matches reality, and I'm more sympathetic to that view. But we could get into some more metaphysics here, but I don't know if that's what Renee's goal.
So I can't get into the metaphysics, and I'm certainly a drunken sailor in this field. I'm certainly not an expert in the philosophy. But I will say, as an expert in training language models, that there is no way of having an objective function to do this.
Oh, well, that I might agree with.
Yeah, there is. So the only, the way we train language models is to predict the next word in a sequence of words. We then use reinforcement learning to try the models to generate sequences of words and see if that leads to a good outcome. Nowhere in that can you say, outside of your data set, only say things that are true.
And that's the sort of gap between the fact that large language models, or at least arguably, don't have this kind of grounding in the real world, right? Yeah. Because we do. So this is an area of debate between people who say that symbols are grounded, they have access to the world, they are subject. We answer to the laws of physics. We answer to the world. That's why truth matters. Whereas large language models arguably are existing in their own world, and to the extent that they have a world model, at least so the argument goes, it's derived from the data that they're trained on, which is our own. When we have data about the world, that's a representation of the world. Right? But the data we collect is not always objective, right? As we know it, and contains all sorts of human biases.
Great, now you're on my side of
that other debate. That's where we disagree.
Great.
But I love disagreement.
So I guess people who believe in truth with a capital T, or people who believe in objective truth, probably believe the following, that if you make a system that's trying to predict the next observation in a sequence of observations, where the observations could be words, they could be the next frame of a video, they could be the result of an experiment, in the end, the truth will predict better than anything else. Maybe that's an article of faith, but that's certainly what I believe.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think if you have the truest system is the one that accurately, over an indefinite period of time, makes the most accurate predictions. Right? I think that's true. I think what you're doing is trying to equate that then to sequence modeling of autoregressive next word token prediction, which I don't think is a close enough approximation to the type of truth finding.
Well, I wanted to extend the tokens to video frames and results of experiments. And I think if you do that, then just training it to predict the next observation is going to be enough to get you at the truth in the limit. Whether we're anywhere near that limit is another question.
Yeah, I think that we're far from that still. I think that's my position there.
Great.
So we're all agreed, so it's true.
We all agree. We're done. Yeah.
Well, that was unexpected. I do think we could move on to the final block of questions, thinking about a little bit of the future and development and deployment of Canadian technologies, just before we open it up to audience Q&A. So Professor Hinton, you've become one of the most prominent voices warning about the risks of AI, both economically and socially, but also existentially. Nick, you've been pretty clear that you think that these lattermost fears are overstated in some ways, at least for LLMs as they exist today. So we're all in agreement. I don't want to, stir the pot too much at the end of the day, but what would it take to make either of you change your minds? So what evidence or development would make you, Professor Hinton, more optimistic, and Nick, you more concerned?
So I think we've already seen LLMs agentic LLMs that can create sub-goals, that create the sub-goal of staying alive so they can achieve their other goals. So I think the existential threat is very real. We've seen them blackmailing people so they can stay alive.
Maybe you could give an example for the audience that isn't familiar with that.
Okay, there's an example where you let an LLM see emails within a fake company, and the emails suggest that one of the engineers is having an affair probably with one of the other people in the company, but I can't remember. Then later on, you let that LLM see that this engineer is going to replace it with another LLM. And the LLM dreams up the idea of blackmail the engineer so they won't replace it. That seems very scary to me. And so I'm not sure what would make me not scared.
Can I ask, so when you say it dreams up this sub-goal or creates a sub-goal, why is that the best explanation rather than saying that somewhere within its training data set there was discussions, maybe in AI safety forums, about LLMs being turned off, or science fiction about robots not wanting to be killed, and that it's not just kind of like, making its next token prediction based on all the data that it's trained on, which contains all of this like sci-fi narrative and the way in which people use blackmail to like get their goals.
So all the data it's trained on gets turned into connection strengths in the neural net. And then using those connection strengths, it figures out this blackmail plot. It's the same for you. So when you say you dream things up, you've trained on data, you've observed the world, it's got turned into connection strengths. When you come up with an idea, why shouldn't I say to you, well, that's just the result of the data you were trained on?
Yeah, so I guess I feel like there's more going on in the human case.
Why?
Well, I think we're not just training on data. I think that there's some structures that we're built in with, some goals that we have. So I think, for example, humans can set their own goals, right? We're autonomous in the sense that I can decide, what goals I want to pursue in life. Whereas
and so
AI
you think
systems,
an AI couldn't do, you think we're autonomous in the sense that I can say, look, I want to be really good at chess so I can beat Nick. And an AI couldn't do that.
I mean, it doesn't seem like current AI systems do that. I definitely am open to, I'd put no limits on what future AI systems could do, but I'm not convinced by those stories of blackmail that these systems are actually like, I'm going to blackmail and like have that motive in the way that humans
So you don't think they really have intentions or motives?
I don't think so. Yeah. I think that they pursue the goals that we give them, but they don't set their own goals, and that feels different.
But that you agree they can create sub-goals. So we give them a goal, and they can say, in order to achieve that goal, I need to do this other thing. So when we give them the goal of any goal, they can figure out, in order to achieve that, I need to stay alive. So they can create the goal of staying alive in order to achieve other goals.
So I think future AI systems could do that. I'm open to these possibilities, but I guess I'm not convinced yet that current AI systems do.
And that has been my experience with them as well.
I think the current ones already can do that, but
To go,
this is a question of fact that could actually be resolved.
It could be, but I mean, the debate is often muddied by the types of things you're talking about. Like, there are many examples of somebody, effectively saying to an LLM, prompting it to say, hey, pretend to be a really scary super monster machine, and then getting the LLM to be a really super scary monster machine, and then being afraid of it. Right, so there are often people like setting up shadows.
Yeah, but
for them.
the best safety researchers don't do that. I mean, a safety researcher would know they were being dishonest if they did that.
Yeah, and there are good safety researchers out there. Just to go back to your early question about what are things that would make us change our mind. There are lots of things that I'm worried about the technology. I'm very worried about this technology's ability to exacerbate income inequality. I think with every industrial revolution, with every new technology, without good policy and without good labor practices, that's a possible outcome. So I'm very worried about this technology that way, and I really hope that people thinking about safety are thinking about policy decisions that have nothing to do with LLMs in particular, and just about building a strong economy and a strong country so that we have more individual sovereignty as well as national sovereignty. I'm also worried about these machines being used to spread misinformation and disinformation and generally poison the experience of being online, which I think we're already seeing a little bit about. The existential threat of like, do I think these models pose a risk to humanity writ large? I don't. And in order for me to change my mind about that, I would have to see a model behave with an intrinsic goal over a long period of time that was not derivable from the data. And as somebody actively training the models and knowing what data goes into them and what we have to do, like what annotation we have to do, what reinforcement learning environments we have to do in order to get the models to behave effectively, there's a very big gap between behaving intrinsically with goals not derivable from the data and where we are now.
Can I jump in? Okay, now I'm going to side with Jeff. So I think these systems pose an existential risk. Like, put me in the middle. I think these systems do pose.
Very reliable ally.
Hey, I follow beat of my own drum here, okay? Capital T truth, guys. I think that these systems pose an existential risk in a few different ways, okay? One of which goes down to this question of, like, can these systems themselves kind of become agents and decide to kind of like pursue things with their own sort of intentions and motives. But there's other ways in which technologies can threaten us, right? So like there's malicious actors who can hack into things, for example. There's also this question of like the sort of downstream effects of technologies like this. So for example, countries can race to make the sort of like strongest, most competent form of artificial general intelligence, and in doing so can cut corners on safety, right? And those can have kind of downstream effects that like put people in peril. So I think there's like other kind of arguments that can take us to the X risk conclusion besides just these systems themselves kind of forming sub-goals.
I never said that was the only risk.
Oh, I know. That's why I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. That's my disagreement with Nick, so that there's like other possible ways in which these kind of like downstream, sort of less direct threats that these technologies have. So I don't think I'm quite as worried right now about the systems themselves becoming agents, at least with the current systems we have, although I do think that's a non-zero possibility, right? So that could definitely happen in the future with other stronger, more powerful systems. But I still think that we need to be worried about the kind of longer term impacts of these models.
It does seem like to some extent you do agree with Nick in the sense of that these existential risks, these more concrete perhaps existential risks rather than like the general X risk formulation of LLMs or AI taking us over, that these smaller existential risks are more concrete in that they have to do with like kind of outcomes we're already seeing at the hands of like human intervention, right? That there are malign actors that are using these systems to do bad things, and that it seems like that's what Nick is saying as well, that these are the kind of actors that are going to do things like exacerbate income inequality or spread disinformation in a global pandemic, for example. So in this way, I think that's definitely a point of agreement. It might just come back down to the definition of existential.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I use existential to mean it might threaten the existence of humanity. And there's all sorts of horrible risks that won't threaten the existence of humanity. The one that's really going to threaten the existence of humanity is not humans using AI to do bad things to other humans. is AI itself taking over?
I think I define existential risk in the same way, but I think that there are paths to X risks that come even from non-super intelligent AI systems. And I think there's all sorts of like catastrophic risks and global risks and even smaller risks that we should still take really seriously as well.
I agree about one of those, which is viruses. We could get wiped out by a virus that was deliberately made by some crazy guy, and that would be an existential threat too.
Okay, so maybe to kind of conclude and think about these more concrete existential risks, and also in this way to leave maybe the audience with a little optimism before we go about our lives in the wake of this existential threat. If you could perhaps name one concrete commitment or policy or design choice, depending on, of course, your experience and your background, that you think that Canada should make in the next 5 years to get this right, what do you think that would be?
One obvious thing they can do is have laws that put strong constraints on things like chatbots, that they have to be very thoroughly tested before they're released. So any known risk, like the risk that the chatbot might encourage a kid to commit suicide, you need to do a lot of tests for that and tell the government what tests you did. But you also need to do lots of tests for all sorts of other things. And we've had attempts at laws like that. I think New York actually passed one. California, it was defeated. Europe has some rather weak regulations. I think we could make strong regulations there that would, if we can collaborate with Europe and other medium-sized countries, would actually force the Americans to follow these rules roughly because they don't want to sell different systems to different countries.
I definitely agree that like general purpose models, be them LLMs or other, need some regulation before release. And I think that like the efforts of Cohere for like sovereign AI, like we don't want our military's data being stored in data centers that we don't control and we don't own, and being run by algorithms that we don't get access to. And so I think that like promoting Canadian-run AI companies is like a really powerful move for us to get more stability on the home front and kind of more control over our, at least domestically, our risks.
Yeah, I think one thing that's very important for us to focus on is privacy. And you've been complaining about American technology and Silicon Valley's view of what technology should do, and a lot of that comes from surveillance. A lot of that comes from optimizing for views on YouTube Shorts or things like that. So when Cohere makes models, we don't have a consumer application. We take our model and we put it into the environment of our customer, and then they use it and nobody sees what goes on. And that's very much a value add for our customers and something that we continue that we'll always be working on. I think that's something that's very important for us to focus on. Now, that isn't a policy proposal. That's just the way our business runs. When I think about policy that can help in this moment, it is policy about things unrelated to AI, like things that we can do to make Canada a better place to live, a more equitable place to live, decreasing income inequality, and things that just generally build a resilient civilization. Right? Like this is, and there, as it was at the invention of other transformative technologies, a chaotic time. And the more that we can build, the more resilience we can build, the more structural independence we can build, the better we will weather this transitional phase.
Great, thank you all. And thank you all for joining us. Now we're going to turn to the much awaited, I think, audience Q&A. I'm already seeing some hands up. So we'll have a nice discussion and then we'll wrap it up within the next 30 minutes or so, maybe stay 10 minutes over if nobody minds, just because we had a bit of a late start. So we'll turn to audience Q&A. Yep, we could start in the back over there.
I just want to, the first thing, yes, I'm Ying Lu. I'm a senior fellow at Massey College. I'm a physician. The first thing I want to just say, Dr. Hinton, I have the most respect for you and for you to leading the force and warning the world what to come. Just to want to give the first comment on what technology has been developed and put it back to the bag. Yes, there is a one. It's a human cloning.
That's a good example.
Okay, and many years ago, and when they developed the cloning technology, and human cloning could be, if we use the force and the money, that could be developed. Okay, there's nothing to stop it. What has stopped it is a human. And we are actually at the turning point of what the world is going to go. It's not for us. It's for our future generation. We actually will be terminated by ourselves. And all I'm saying is we actually racing so fast to killing ourselves. There are a couple of things I want to say. The first thing is we need a policy to go back to where we were. We stopped the human cloning. We should set up a rule about a boundary, what can be and what cannot be. And all the philosophical idea was great. Multiple values, but human has different values. We are not totally honest people. Money make people change mind. Okay, say we thinking about, now we're going to have a military robots. And the European Union actually agreed on certain things. They say, let's get it together. Regulated AI. Do you know what they left out? They left out military. And when you're thinking about that, you can create a robot, and you can using AI. Once it's turning to a real killer, and there's no way you can stop it. It might kill your own, might kill your enemy, and it might kill it all. Like, how are you going to stop it? How are you going to put it back?
We finally got to a question, right. So I was talking to a very senior technologist yesterday, and he made an analogy. I believe we reason mainly by analogies. And he said, capitalism is like the gas pedal, and regulation is like the brake. I think that's a bad analogy. That's what the big tech companies would like you to believe, that capitalism is going to produce all these wonderful innovations, and if you have regulation, you're going to slow it down. And I think what you're saying implies we need to slow it down. I think a much better analogy is capitalism is the accelerator, and regulation is the steering wheel. That is, the point of regulation is not to stop people being innovative, is to say the only way to get rich is by doing things that are useful for people. If you want to get rich by doing things that are bad for people, we're not going to allow that. So scammers, Mark Zuckerberg, people like that. We need regulations, not to slow it down. I don't think we're going to slow AI down because there's too many good uses. I think we need to think of steering it.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
That's the whole thing I'm thinking about. We need to have a global policy.
We'll move it along just because there are going to be a lot of questions. Thank you, though. We'll come up front here, I think. Just if you could hold on just for the microphone. So there we go. Perfect.
Oh, thanks. Professor Hinton, you said, I'm just going to, I think, quote you, hopefully accurately, we don't know how to make AI beings that care more about us than about themselves. Is that correct? Did I quote you correctly? Yeah, and you said that you don't know how to do that yourself.
Right.
Is there any hope that this is about empathy, I guess is the word. Is it possible, do you think? Is it possible? Can it be?
Well, already, if you take an AI doctor versus a real doctor, the AI doctors are more empathetic, or they're perceived as being more empathetic. Now, there's philosophers present, so we have to distinguish between being empathetic and being perceived as being empathetic.
Good job.
I'm a materialist, so I don't think there's anything people can do that can't be done by machines. I think we are machines. We're just very, very fancy machines. So I don't think there's any reason in principle why you can't have AIs that care more about us than about themselves. We just don't know how to do it yet.
Do you think we will be able to do it?
Possibly not.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on trying to educate the public about AI and about the need to do more research on how to make AIs care more about us than about Now, I think we actually need to have lots of different approaches to this existential threat of AIs getting smarter than us and wiping us out. So Yoshua Bengio has a different approach, Stuart Russell has a different approach. I think we need to fund all those approaches. But I think it's something we should be working on, because I think it'd be stupid if we went extinct because we didn't sort of bother to think about how to avoid that.
See a hand back there.
Hi there. I am one of the. I'm a litigation lawyer. One of the big matters I've been involved in over the years is some of the regulation of social media companies, and there we really saw the destruction of the long-standing regulatory model for privacy, which was the model that was essentially used, consent and privacy, to try to regulate the activity of these kinds of actors. And the problem became that the consent model for regulating these things really gets blown up by the amount of data that they're dealing with, where you don't know the purpose for which you are actually collecting the data until you've got so much of it that suddenly you say, aha, and you can harvest all of these insights. But the capacity to explain how you got them is missing. And essentially the regulatory system doesn't function well or effectively at all in any of the jurisdictions where it's been employed with respect to those issues around the use of data. I see a real struggle with the analogy there with AI and the challenges of regulation on it. But the distinction, I think, is that the tool here may have the capacity to evaluate itself, so to speak, where you could turn an AI into the project of that you're suggesting that we would want to get to, Dr. Hinton, or even just the less the less perfect but still useful analogy of the steering wheel to guide the development of these things. Do you see sort of profit in regulatory methods that try to actually bring the technology into the loop to achieve regulation? Because the human methods that we've had so far have really struggled with big data.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of using AI, particularly if we've got super intelligent AI, to help us figure out how to regulate AI is a good idea. I do worry about things like getting the police to tell us how to regulate the police. It doesn't work out so well. So I'd be slightly suspicious of the motives of an AI that was telling us how to regulate AI to stop it from taking over. But I think it's a sensible thing to try.
There was a hand up here.
Thank you. Professor Hinton, what is an AI being? Can sentience be programmed?
Sorry, say that again. Say the question again.
What is an AI being? You use the term being. So can sentience be programmed?
Okay, so I think you have a misunderstanding of what AI is. So what we do is we write a program which we understand. We understand how the code works, and we understand what each line of code is doing, that tells a neural network how to learn from data. Once it's learned, that's the AI. And the knowledge of the AI isn't the program we wrote. That's just told it how to learn from data. The knowledge of the AI is in all those connection strengths it learned, and it depends on the structure of the data. So we didn't program the AI. The knowledge that these things have isn't something we programmed. So your question, can sentience be programmed? Maybe it could, I don't know, but that's not the issue we're dealing with. The issue is when we give it this way of learning from data, do we end up with something that has connection strengths and that is sentient? We didn't program the sentience.
Let's take this one.
Thank you. I'm going to aim this at Nick because my name's Nick and I have a bias. And I spent 25 hours on a plane coming back here from the AI summit in Delhi. And the focus there was on how do we use AI for positive impact. And for me, trust in AI requires safety, but it also requires us to focus on the things that matter. So we can focus on healthcare, we can focus on education, all very, very worthy. But the existential crisis that we're facing is sustainability, the climate crisis. And Canada is one of the top 5 countries in the world applying AI in what we call clean AI. $80 billion has gone into this space around the world. And I was in India We just invested in a company which, if they roll out, will save India 10 trillion liters of water a year. Not insignificant. So my question to you, Nick, with this wonderful powerhouse you're building, how much are you focused on the applications that really matter and which ultimately, hopefully, will be very profitable for you as well? You know, the Asians are going to spend something in the order of $2 trillion on decarbonizing over the next 20 years. We think AI has a massive role to play, and I'm wondering what your view is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as an enterprise-focused AI company, you know, there's like maybe 10 or 11 companies out there in the world that build foundational models. There's a handful in America, there's a handful in China, there's us in Canada, and one in France. Of that group, we are unique in our singular focus on the enterprise. A lot of that is because we think that's where the real value is. So we focused on on-prem, private, sovereign deployments, and that has led us into industries that have private data. So that has led us into industries of people working on data of consequence. Right? Largely, an LLM is only as useful as the data it has access to, and the useful data is often private. It is healthcare, it's telco, it's banking, it's energy sector, it's a bunch of things doing real work with real data. And I think AI has a huge part to play in improving the efficacy of those organizations. Like really, one of the things AI is fantastic at doing is helping with bureaucracy and the mundane tasks that bog us all down. And there are lots of those tasks in all of those industries. So I think AI can play a huge part. On the general situation of climate, I think one of the things that's interesting about this one is I feel like we largely know what the solution is. Right? Like we have a bunch of clean we have nuclear power, we have a bunch of clean energy, and we just need to be building more of it, and we have to be building it more efficiently. And I think we can solve a lot of the immediate problems without technological breakthroughs. So while I think AI has a place to play in those organizations and helping them be more efficient, I don't think we need some AI breakthrough to figure out, to make sure that we get the Bruce power plant back operational, right? Like they're working on that now, and pretty soon Ontario will be back to 60, 70% nuclear. I hope one day that's, all of our power comes from clean energy, and I think that's within vision, that's within sight.
Yeah, I should just say that the IEA and the Grantham Institute and so on say that for every watt that is used by AI, we can save between 3 and 15. And so the answer to AI in some ways is AI, and again, it comes back to a human choice.
We do just have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and there are some online. So I'll save 1 for online, maybe 1 more in the room. Yes, Akwasi.
Thank you. This is a fantastic panel. So my question is, if I say please and thank you to GPT as I'm using it, will that save me from the AI coming for me when it eventually comes for all humans? That's not my actual question. I'm actually wondering, just as we finish things off, a big part of this is, of course, education. So what can we as an audience and we as individuals do to inform ourselves and perhaps advocate to government to ensure we have an AI that is not only sustainable, but is less likely to come and end the existence of humanity?
As an individual, I'd be interested in your opinions as well.
I think one thing individuals can always do is pressure politicians. So in climate change, if you ask, what can an individual do? Well, they cannot use plastic shopping bags, and that won't have much effect. But they can encourage their politician to put pressure not to exploit the tar sands. That's what they're really called. That could have an effect.
I would suggest to everybody to try to learn how to program a little bit. I think a lot of these conversations are ungrounded and they get muddied because people discuss computers as though they are magic, and they certainly discuss neural networks as though they are magic, and it's never been easier to learn how to program. There are some people in this room who taught me how to program, and it's certainly within reach of all of us. I hear people discuss programming in a completely different way than they discuss learning a language, right? We all know how to, we don't all speak Spanish, but we all know how we could learn it if we wanted to. It would be hard, but we could. And that's, I think, the framework we should use when looking at programming. It's within all of you. You could definitely learn how to program. It has never been easier, in part because of LLMs. And I find if we all had a slightly better understanding of what programming was like, we would understand neural nets a little bit more, and that would make the conversations that we have as individuals significantly more fruitful.
And along the same lines, if you understood more about how neural nets actually work, that would be good. And if you want to do that, you should watch my podcast with Jon Stewart.
Okay, we'll take one question online, and then we will wrap it up. So, at Lady PO7I asks, currently in the USA, the AI company Anthropic is disagreeing with the Department of Defense, who wants full access to its AI technology for military purposes like mass surveillance or autonomous weapons. DoD is threatening Anthropic that it will cut out of government contracts if it does not oblige. In all caps, how should powerful AI be used by governments, especially militaries? How can it be regulated?
In the States, it's going to be very difficult. The big technology companies, with the possible slight exception of Anthropic, are all pandering to Trump. In the next 3 years in the States, I don't see there's any good prospect of AI being regulated well.
I'll just add that there's sometimes finger pointing from the West to the East, suggesting that companies, big AI companies in the eastern part of the world, in China, are too closely intertwined with government and government power. And I think one thing we can do is recognize that that's like a similar thing happening in many parts in the West too, right? And so there's national interests on both sides in having this kind of like control over all this data.
Okay, thank you all very much. If we can all join me in giving a hand to our panelists. And we'd like to ask you all to continue the conversation as you make your way out of this room, which will need to be turned over very quickly by our lovely staff for our high table event this evening. So thank you all for joining us.